Hello, and thank you to everyone for attending today's webinar, Software Quality at Speed in Agile and DevOps Environments. My name is Andrew Steger from 451 Research, and I will be your moderator today. Presenting on today's webinar first will be Nancy Gohring, Senior Analyst at 451 Research. Following Nancy will be Darminder Dewan, Agile QA Manager at Infostretch. I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping items before we get started. After the two presentations, we have a brief Q&A period. To submit a question, just click on the question button within the webinar interface. We'll try to get as many questions as possible, but if we run out, we will answer the question after the webinar. In addition to the presentation, currently we will make it available to all attendees. We also ask you to provide us with any feedback that you might have from today's presentation. Also, over the course of the webinar, we will have some polling questions. They will be posted on the interface, and simply click the answer you most agree with to answer. Perfect. So with that, let's get started. Nancy, please take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks, everyone, for joining us today. I'm Nancy Gohring. I'm an analyst here at 451 Research, and I follow application and infrastructure performance, which means that I follow APM vendors, infrastructure monitoring vendors, and performance testing. And I'm going to talk today about how the need for speed and agility is shaping testing. And I'll start by talking a bit about what's driving this need for speed and agility, and how that need for speed is in part driving the IT transformations that we're seeing kind of across the board, and in turn how that's impacting the way that organizations are approaching testing. So to start out, I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the idea of software is eating the world, and how central software has become to many types of businesses, and in turn the pressure that's putting on these businesses to move quickly. So these are just some big name examples that lots of you are likely to recognize. So for instance, John Deere, large manufacturer of farm equipment, last year said that they expected to have more software engineers than mechanical engineers in the next 5 years. So that's a pretty clear indication that this company is shifting resources towards software more so than its traditional business. And it's not necessarily that they're not going to be making the same type of farm equipment that they were, just that software is becoming increasingly important to both drive that equipment and create new products and services that are going to be valuable for their customers. GE recently said that they're transforming from a heavy industrial company to a digital industrial company. Again, a clear sign that they're shifting towards software. Royal Bank of Canada, I heard this gentleman on stage at a conference recently saying that they're basically an IT company with a bank sign on the front door. So clearly IT is very central to making this financial services business run. And then my final example is Ford, and many of you may have seen that Ford made a $182 million investment in Pivotal last year. So that alone is, pretty remarkable, right? This is an automobile manufacturer, a very old, sort of traditional company that has been around for ages. That's a pretty huge investment in a software company. And one of the reasons that the company CEO said that they invested in Pivotal was that it would help Ford speed software development. So clearly, software is becoming increasingly important to all types of business. And as such, these businesses are feeling pressure to move faster, to continually update their software, both to meet customer needs and to meet competitive pressure. And we're seeing this reflected sort of across the board. So this is a survey question that we asked to IT decision makers, and we asked them, what's the most important goal for your organization's IT environment over the next 12 months? And you can see the very top most important goal is respond faster to business needs. So 36.4% said that. Number two, reducing costs. is not a big surprise. And then the third most important goal is improving reliability and availability, which obviously gets to the topic at hand here, which is testing. And it turns out that in at least forward-thinking organizations that are adopting modern technologies and practices, it's working. They are, in fact, able to release software at a much faster cadence than they used to. So the caveat to this slide is that this is a relatively small survey, so we talked to 200 people, and unless you're looking at this slide and feeling bad if you're releasing at a slower pace, this was specifically geared towards folks who are developing in the cloud. So we know that they're already advanced, because we know that people who are adopting the cloud are one of the main drivers of cloud adoption is speed to market. So this is already sort of an advanced group of people, but it goes to show that if you adopt modern technologies and practices, you can in fact speed your time to market with software development. And so amongst these folks, only 1% said that they were still releasing annually. The biggest bucket was monthly at 34%. And then a fair number of folks said that they're pushing out software updates weekly and daily. And so how are they getting there? So, I mentioned cloud, so there's a bunch of new technologies, containers, microservices that can also help with speeding time to market. And, DevOps adoption is also something that we're seeing folks do as a way to get to market faster with their software development. And, this is a big buzz, right? Lots of people are talking about DevOps. As you may have experienced, the definition sort of varies pretty widely depending on who you ask what DevOps is. I think of it along these three sort of pillars. So it ends up involving a bunch of organizational changes, cultural changes in terms of more empathy for people in your organization that have different jobs and are in different roles. And there's a lot of process changes, right? So a lot of automation and a lot of changes to the way that software is developed and infrastructure is managed. And we're seeing, really good interest in DevOps. So here we asked, how would you describe your organization's use of DevOps? And so 41% of IT decision makers who we spoke with said that they're either in broad implementation or initial implementation of production apps from DevOps organizations. So again, that's 41%. That's a pretty good adoption number there. And again, it depends on how you define DevOps, but there's clear interest here. And if you say that you're adopting DevOps, then likely you're doing something, you're thinking about it, you're transforming in a way that you're hoping is going to help you speed time to market. And an additional 24.5% here said that they're thinking about it, they're in discovery and evaluation. Some folks are doing it in tests and other pilots. So seeing pretty good interest in DevOps. And we think of DevOps as sort of a piece of broader IT transformation that we're seeing underway. And so this is a question we've asked. It's a very simple question. Is your organization currently undergoing an IT transformation initiative? And we're seeing growth in the number of people that are saying yes. So last year we asked, and 53% said yes, that they're doing some sort of IT transformation. This year that went up to 58%. So DevOps is part of this. There's a whole bunch of organizational changes that are going on in IT organizations for a number of reasons, including to move faster. And part of this IT transformation is, tweaking the roles within organizations. And so here the question was, which of the following best characterizes the layout of your IT technical teams? And, this is a question that we've only just begun asking, but we're thinking that there's a progression here where the specialist orientation gives way over time to DevOps and more generalist focused IT teams. So again, there's experimentation going on. There's a lot of changes going on within development and IT and operations organizations in order to better meet competitive pressure and customer needs. And so that brings us to our first poll question. And the question is, what are the major pain points for your QA team? And take a second to take a look at these at the answers here, and you can just click on the one that best fits. So, do you have long testing cycles? Do you feel like you're putting best practices into action? Are you using the right set of tools, or do you not have the right set of tools? So what are your big pain points? We'll be interested to see what the audience, what stage sort of the audience is here. So do take a second to vote, and then I'm going to move on here. So, you know, as part of this experimentation that we're seeing in terms of IT transformation and DevOps is what I'm hearing is a lot of vendors and also organizations sort of talking about this idea of shift left, where a bunch of different functions move into the responsibility of DevOps shops. And so some of you have maybe heard some of these kind of mashups of titles. So there's DevSecOps. I recently heard DevDBA. So the problem here is that this is happening in so many areas of specialization that I think it's not really reasonable. You know, there's this idea that you can have these generalists in a DevOps shop that are, you know, expert developers. They're also security pros, they're QA pros, they're DBAs, they're network admins, all rolled up into one person. And, you know, I think that at the end of the day, things are gonna fall through the cracks, right? One person can't be an expert in all of those areas. And so what I'm seeing is some pretty interesting experimentation within organizations in terms of ways to allow all of these functions to happen, right? So make sure that you have a security policies in place. Make sure that you have QA experts who can ensure that software is being properly tested before it's pushed, et cetera, without, you know, trying to unreasonably ask one person to do it all. And I'm going to talk through some of those models that I'm seeing specifically with an eye towards how this is happening in with testing functionality. So I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of what the traditional IT or testing organization looks like, and then I'm going to talk about these three new models that I'm seeing companies play around with, and I'm thinking of them as embedded, hybrid, and DevTestOps. So I'm going to talk through each of these briefly. So in a traditional model, you have a development shop, and then you have a totally separate QA team. And what happens is developers build their software, and then they hand off to the QA team, and the QA team runs a bunch of tests, surely finds some problems, ships the code back to the developers who work on trying to fix the problems, and then they, again, ship the code back to QA, and this process kind of goes on and on. And the issue with this is that testing becomes a gate, and it often slows down this process of shipping code, and we've, you know, established here that speed is pretty key these days. And sort of worst case scenario is that this becomes so frustrating to development shops that they decide to skip testing altogether, and that, for obvious reasons, is not really a great scenario. So one organizational model that I'm seeing is I'm thinking of as embedded. And so in this model, there are a test or a QA expert that lives within application teams, and that expert works very closely with developers and operations staff at DevOps folks to design appropriate tests for the applications that are being developed, ensure that those tests are being run throughout the development process so as not to slow down production code, and executing and designing and just ensuring that testing happens. And the result that I've seen in this model is, you know, you're going to ship a really quality app. This is a really good model. This isn't really a downside, but something to think about is that this is really a model that's going to work for very large organizations that have lots of application development teams, and also can afford to hire, you know, QA people that are going to live in each of these teams. So there is sort of like an organizational size thing that's going on here to enable this type of model. Another model that I've seen folks have good success with, I think of a sort of a hybrid model where there's still a QA team, it's still a separate team, but individuals on that team, the individual experts, are sort of assigned to different application development teams or DevOps teams, where they kind of consult with them. So if a new team is spun up to build a new app, the test expert comes in, helps that team understand what type of testing is appropriate for that application, how to integrate the testing within their CI/CD tools and within their cycle. The QA team may choose the testing tools because they're the expert, and then they can mentor the team members on how to use them and how to best incorporate testing into their release cycle. And the result of this model that I've seen is a really quality app. There's good thorough testing. Sort of a minor downside that I can think of here is that there's a bit of management headache if you're having to sort of assign and reassign QA team members to different development teams. But that's pretty minor. I don't think that's a big thing. I think that this is a model that can work really well for companies pretty much of all sizes. And then finally, there's this idea of dev test ops. And this is the idea that one person on the DevOps team is sort of designated as the testing pro. The downside to this is that when I've seen this happen, typically this person that's assigned to be the testing pro doesn't necessarily have a lot of experience, right? They're not a QA expert by trade. They're just like the designated person. And the good news here is at least testing is happening, and I'm seeing more and more testing tools that are sort of designed with this role in mind. And these tools are designed to help suggest, the appropriate types of tests, help the user build and run those tests, help them figure out, what types of tools are best to integrate with. And so this is becoming an easier proposition, even if there are some downsides, which is that, you're potentially going to have not necessarily the most sophisticated testing because this particular person doesn't necessarily have a QA background. So those are sort of some models that I'm seeing folks play with and do so successfully. If you're an organization that's thinking about how to update your testing processes and ensure that you're testing things properly and pushing quality code, and if you're thinking about ways that you can sort of transform your organization, here's some things to think about. So, think about the tools that you're choosing, and I think I've seen that it's a good idea to choose tools that are designed both for a QA pro as well as more of a generalist in a DevOps shop. And one reason for that is that if those two roles can collaborate closer, they're going to be able to move faster. And so it makes sense for them to be able to share tools. Maybe the QA pro can design a lot of the tests, and then the DevOps folk are looking at those tests and initiating them. And so both types of roles are able to use the tool and really work together. I would also say, think a lot about how to integrate your testing tools with the other tools that you're using. And so it makes a lot of sense to try to integrate testing tools with automation tools that automatically kick off tests as code is being pushed. Makes sense to integrate with monitoring tools so that when tests are run, the monitoring tool can help identify the root of a problem that a test may surface. Makes sense to integrate with ticketing tools that can insert a ticket when a test surfaces an issue, so that the folks that are responding to issues can prioritize fixing the problems that the testing tools have surfaced. So integrate. But at the same time, know that adopting all these tools won't get you all the way there. So There's a lot of other factors at play. So just like buying a bunch of tools isn't going to turn you into a DevOps shop that appropriately does testing. And especially when you're thinking about different types of ways to organize around testing, definitely think about your corporate culture. Some cultures are going to be more conducive to, say, what I was thinking of as a hybrid model. Others might be more conducive to a dev test ops kind of role. So think about your corporate culture and what seems to make sense for you. And then finally, account for headcount, because some of these models, again, as I mentioned earlier, will work better with larger enterprises, and others may work well in more of like a startup type of environment. And so finally, I just wanted to close with this slide. As I was talking about integrate. This is kind of just a fun graphic that this company called VBO Labs puts together. They call it the periodic table of DevOps tools. It's really just a snapshot of all the different kinds of tools that DevOps shops are employing these days that help them move faster. That sort of orange grouping in the center is the testing tools. And my point here is just that, if a team is using all these tools and they're all sort of working independently, that actually begins to slow things down. And so as you're choosing all of these different tools, as you're trying to transform your IT organization and move faster and ensure you're doing things like testing and inserting security into your processes, think a lot about how those tools integrate, because that's going to make your life a lot easier. And so with that, I'm going to hand over to Dharminder. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you so much. I think it was really a great, from the research perspective, a lot of things which I also learned. So good morning, everybody. Good afternoon to all our attendees who are from the East Coast, and anybody who's from remote sites. Good evening to you guys. From my perspective, what I'm going to talk about today in general is that how the testing, as we saw from the research perspective, how do we see the shift in the testing from the traditional model to the new model, how it's moving from past to present. What I really see is that any organization that we go to, any company that I've worked with, they have a very, very simple goal from a product perspective, which is they want to deploy a quality product. They want to deploy it faster with less cost. And lately, we're talking about a lot of process efficiency, because that's how you have to reduce cost. Because gone are the days when the cost reduction was basically about, let's get the people out, let's get less number of people. That's the effective way of reducing cost. Gone are those days. I think it's more like becoming more and more efficient, getting done more from less. I think that's really the key. And as you see here, there's a clear demarcation in terms of how testing has shifted from past to present. What Nancy was talking about earlier also was that in the traditional model, there was a handover. It was like the compartments of a train, that one compartment is done with their work and that it hands over with a chain connection to the next compartment. Now what we are seeing is that there is an overlap there. Testing is not really just the job of a QA engineer. It's being embedded into the dev as well as into the ops team or the traditional tools team. What we see is a lot more focus onto unit testing than it was before. Earlier, the unit testing has been not a lot of focus was done on unit testing. And in general, in the past, what we saw was there was duplication, there was no optimization, and even the resources sometimes were not efficient enough. And what we see now is integrated testing, which is optimized for setup, cleanup, and sequencing. So in the past, I would say almost 2 decades plus, I personally have worked on a lot of models starting from the waterfall, moving towards Agile. We have seen everything, and as a company, a services company, we see different challenges across different customers when we work with them. And what we see now is digital. Digital is the word right now. That's basically transforming the SDLC. What does digital really mean? And as we see in the near future, the testing, what we saw just now was 10% is what our numbers are. We are assuming that testing paradigm, which would be the specialist doing the testing, the percentage would reduce further down, and the testing would spread across, as you mentioned, generalists, it would be part of development domain, it would be part of ops domain. And when we say digital, we are talking about test automation, we are talking about nightly builds, we are talking about building and testing every check-in, faster bug discovery, faster bug fixing, and there's optimization for setup, cleaning, and sequencing. Again, I just want to emphasize this because the idea here is that the more automation we do, that's the only way we can be more efficient. And one of the requirements from any organization is to make sure that we are deploying faster, we are deploying quicker, and the time to market is much, much faster. What that means from our perspective is the shift left, which is basically what we are doing is we are moving from a QA environment to a QE environment. We are moving from a quality assurance to a quality engineering. And if you see here in this, that in a typical quality model versus a shift left quality model, the peaking has changed. Peaking, what that means is the attention to quality. Attention to quality is being given more towards the start of the, or in the beginning part of the SDLC rather than later on. I worked in traditional organizations where the focus used to be that we always used to struggle with unit testing. We always used to struggle with finding majority of the bugs in the earlier part of the cycle. The issues were, I would say 75 to 80% of the problems, they were found during the testing cycles, which were way after the development was done and the code freeze was done. That's when historically the bugs used to be figured out, and that's when the resolution used to be happening for those. So it was not very cost effective. Whereas now what we see is, as we saw the hybrid and the DevOps model, that all of this testing is being done as part of the development cycle itself. In the Agile model, it's done within the sprint. What I'm seeing is that what we are seeing as a company is that the product or the whatever features are being developed as part of that sprint are not okay till the quality gate is passed at a sprint level. And the expectation from a process perspective, from the product perspective, is that the product which comes out on an Agile environment at an every sprint level should be a deployable product. So this is something interesting stuff that we have seen, and of course that leads pretty much about the cost of fixing bugs. Ultimately, if the goal of the organization is time to market, the goal of the organization is becoming more efficient, the cost of fixing bugs is very, very, very critical. Because if you look at the traditional QA model, I think anybody who is in this QA world, they would have seen this model and they would have seen this curve, because it's been there for ages, and we have been discussing this, that the sooner we find the bugs, it's easier and it's more cost efficient to fix the bugs. In the Agile QA model, that's first thing which everybody I think experience, that we start seeing the cost of fixing bugs goes down. The time to fix bugs in the SDLC is faster, and the duration to fix the bug reduces, because the stuff that we do here is that we do testing after every check-in. And then of course out here, a lot of times when you see these graphs, sometimes it's very difficult to correlate that how come I'm seeing this shift even though in my horizontal axis the numbers are the same. It's the way you should look at this particular graph is that the duration from requirements down to the production, that has reduced in an Agile QA model compared to a traditional QA model. That's why the fixing, there's a lot of overlap which is happening within requirements, within the design description, unit testing, the functional testing, the UAT, and the production. So this thing is much, much faster. And what that does for any customer is faster deployment, being cost efficient, and then of course the process efficiency is there. What we have seen as a summary from our company's observations is that average release frequency for majority of the companies has gone up by 150%. And just for mentioning it here, that we are working with Fortune 1000 companies. Those are the companies where we seeing this shift. We are seeing these enhancements. We are seeing these advancements. The pushing changes to production is 2 times faster. Of course, this is using CI/CD. Continuous integration, continuous deployment. CI, well, that's continuous integration, but for me, CI always has been continuous improvement. That's how I feel the shift has been from a traditional QA model to this QE model, because every time there's a retro that we do retrospective, we just figure out that, okay, what's the advantage we need to have, how we become more efficient. That's continuous look back, continuous process improvement. That's what has driven us here. Will it stop here? Absolutely not. I think there's still a long way we need to go. And as we talk about this, I probably would reflect back 15, 18 years. What I saw even in those traditional models was that the way to become more efficient was still there. Some of you, whoever have been in the industry for a few decades, you would know that at that time it was a struggle. From moving the testing into development was a huge discussion point. There was a pushback from every organization to make sure that they just focus around what they do best, which is specialist. Now, since we talk about generalists, that's what the future is. That we are expecting that a developer should be able to do testing. A tester should be able to do the building of the product. They should be able to run automation test cases. Are we talking about manual testers? Are we talking about automation? There's a merge which is happening right now. What that does to us is that if the more generalists you are, you can make even faster and intelligent decisions, even from the predictive QA perspective. Test automation, we are seeing that being increased by 200%. Do we see that just now? I think automation has historically been proven to be very, very effective, because what that does to us is there's a regression aspect of it, there's a new feature aspect of it, there are soak testing we are talking about stress testing, we are talking about smoke testing. There's so much we need to do. And every time there's a time crunch. Every time there are drop dead dates. So automation is the key, where we can definitely do testing, we can do builds, we can do nightly builds. So that's where the future was seen 15 years back, and we continue to progress, and we see that going forward, there would be much more enhancements that would be happening in the same domain, where the future would really for us entail that more efficiency, more faster, and a faster time to market. That brings us to our poll question number 2. Nancy had the first one. And the question is, how would you rank your organization's maturity in testing QA on a scale of 1 through 5? Being not mature enough, 1 being not mature enough, and 5 being very mature. So I'll give you guys a couple of seconds to put that through. As working with different clients, like we said, with the Fortune 1000 companies, what have we seen? What we have seen in general is that going into an organization, there are a lot of challenges an organization have. For a very large national bank that we worked with, we saw that they were struggling with mobile device proliferation, which was the rapid growth in the mobile device usage, and for having the need to have the capability of deploying their products on the iPads, the iPhones, the smart devices, and the rapid deployment of new apps and architecture. It was very important that with the ever-changing world, customers keep on requiring new features, they keep on requiring enhancements. They're not willing to wait for a longer time in terms of bug fixes, because some of them are critical, which is impacting usability, and that definitely pushes the consumers away. So it was very critical for them to get this thing done. And of course, there are complex functionalities, and there's a lot of use cases. There are complex test scenarios that need to be validated just to make sure when it goes out of the door, the customers are not finding those issues, and their experience is excellent, because that's every customer rates any bank, any product based on their user experience. And of course, optimizing the device testing costs, because it's very important that you are it's efficiency. That's the key across any organization. So what we did was that going into this, we had to look at regression cycles. And when we looked at the regression cycles, again, we are talking about digital here, and optimization. When we went into that organization, after doing our analysis, we were able to reduce from 4 weeks to 1 week. Of course, how were we able to do that? There's a lot of sequential aspects of SDLC that we were able to do parallel. stuff. Then we were able to shift left using automation. The requirement was that we need to go on multiple devices, so that was done with the iOS, with the Androids, with the Amazon and the Windows app stores. There was risk-based device selection methodology that was used. We set up a complete test environment for desktop, mobile, native, hybrid, and the web apps, the mobile web. And the coverage was there for functional as well as non-functional device testing. And the other aspect, which I would again like to highlight, is the simulators. As we know, simulators is historically any company which is into devices, any company which is using hardware, they need to use simulators. I used to work with a telecom company, and the biggest challenge was for them was getting those devices there for testing, which used to cost a few $100,000. So the biggest aspect there was simulators, because that gives you more predictability. It's not just the cost, it's about predictability also. Because with simulators, we make it a point that every time you start at the same place and you can end at the same place. So the possibility of your test cases or your execution going faster without having false failures is way, way, way higher compared to the traditional testing that sometimes we end up doing with the actual devices. The other case study that we did also was with a large departmental store. It's a retail departmental store, and the challenges these guys had was they had some omni-channel test strategies, and there was no CI/CD process in place. They were unable to use those test environments due to frequent releases. They were very unstable, because the challenge they were having was that with the multiple stuff, anytime there is a test case or there's automation there, what would do is that there would be realignment there would be changes that would be required, and with the so frequently test the releases, they were not able to manage that. Going into this customer, we looked at the bunch of tools which were there. We analyzed what existing stuff they were using. We started working with Jenkins. The manual tests which were there, they automated those. The automated test cases, the manual test cases which were there, we automated those, because the idea here is that automation is the key. The more we are able to automate, we'll be able to do extensive testing, and plus we need to make sure that there is a focus around for the test QA engineer. They need to focus around the areas which we figure are more critical, and there is a regression aspect from automation that can be done by making sure that those test cases are executed on a nightly build perspective. Then of course the CI/CD process, that was completely automated using Jenkins. There were nightly builds, there were code check-ins, every code check-in had a build. Ready to market, time to market, that was done within 4 months. Of course, the earlier we were talking about yearly releases. From this customer perspective, that went down to 4 months, and execution time was reduced by 75%. Again, how we do it? That's parallel execution, using more devices, automation, and introduced in sprint automation. The idea really is that we don't want to be in a traditional model where there's a sequencing that within the sprint, majority of the time, customers end up doing manual automation, manual testing, and then the focus around automation is not there. Why? Because they don't have a mature automation framework. So this is something which we felt helped them a lot, and that was our observation from their perspective. And I think that brings us to the poll question number 3. That are you interested in talking to experts from Infostretch about Agile testing? You can just say yes or no at this time. I think I missed one slide. Okay, sorry. So this was the third case study. I was wondering, where is my third case study? So we worked with Scholastic, and the challenges that we saw with Scholastic was they were requiring a responsive web-driven application, web design, to handle all the convenience functions. They had some operational inefficiencies, which included lack of automation. There was no common QA strategy. QA was done in silos by each product team. And the automation framework also was very scattered. They had a common product, lot of overlap between features, but the automation framework was not closely tied together. What that pretty much meant was that anytime there was a change, the enhancements used to be done at multiple places. Going into this organization, what first of all, again, automation for us was one of the solutions which we provided to them, that we were able to automate their manual test cases. We were able to develop close to 1,000 plus behavior-driven test cases for them, because what that does is the test case scenarios have to be very closely tied to how a user would be using the particular application, because that's really the key. That would be driving how the customer experience would be. And then, of course, we were able to create a standard automation framework for shared services for them. What helped them was that they were able to leverage it across multiple features, faster realignment, faster execution, faster enhancements. And then we worked with them for doing a test data manager for their regression suite. And then, of course, this reduced the time to test functionalities and the time to market. That was enhanced big time for this particular customer. What in general, what I have seen is that currently the points that are driving our SDLC is where what we see from the customer is the time to market, delivering deployable product faster, almost every sprint in majority of the cases. And then there's an improvement in testing efficiencies. That is one of the requirements, which means reduction in analysis, faster realignment, faster automation, more automation, using digital technologies available out there, CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment. And as I mentioned before, I think for me that's continuous improvement. So where we are today, that's, I think, a work of almost 15 to 20 years, a continuous discussions. There used to be forums, there used to be meetings which we used to go to, share ideas, share thoughts, share suggestions, just to make sure that how we can get to our goal faster. And again, the customer goal, what we have seen from here perspective, absolutely is deliver a quality product with process efficiency, with a faster time to market. That's all I wanted to present to you guys. Thank you. This is Dharmender for attending the webinar from me. So Andy, off to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Dharmender. So now it's time for our question and answer period. If you have a question, just post it on the question spot and hit the submit button. So our first question is, but nowadays testing is performed at every stage of development. Even developers perform unit testing. If testing is slowing down, how will DevOps come into the picture in that domain? I believe that's for you, Dharmender.
All right. So my answer to that question is, I personally don't think testing is slowing down. I think what I really feel is that the emphasis on testing is still there. Everybody understands that we need to value testing, and I think that is being more now. And with DevOps, what I really see is that with DevOps, what we are doing is that testing is again there's a shift left in testing. With DevOps, we are able to do nightly builds. We are able to do, with every code check-in, there's a build that is triggered. So what that does is testing emphasis plus any time there's a failure, the developer can right away go and fix that issue, and then again with that check-in, there's a build which is happening. Historically, what used to happen was that multiple developers used to do a code check-in, then a build used to happen. Once a build used to happen, now if there's a failure, an email goes out or notification goes out to everybody that, oh, you know what, something which has failed. So every developer needs to jump in to look at the problem and then figure out if it's their bug or not. So that's the efficiency I see. It's not the focus which has changed. I think the time when we do the testing, that has shifted left, but focus to me is much more now on testing than it was before.
Excellent, thank you. I believe this question is for you also, Dharmender. When does the QA/QE team need to be involved as part of the shift left paradigm?
So as we talk about the shift left paradigm, I can just answer this question from a historical perspective. I would just quickly go back to the traditional model. So working in the traditional model, what I felt even at that time was, for QA tests to be efficient, the QA, QE engineers need to be involved way earlier at the time when the requirements are being discussed. Because the test cases need to be written way earlier, because that helps them understand what the product, how the product would be built. So in this scenario, I feel that at the time when the requirements are being discussed, that's the time it's good to get the QA, QA engineers involved, and they should be involved during the entire SDLC, even during the design phase. When the product is coming out, during UI reviews, the QE engineers should be involved at every stage, as early as possible, like I said, from the requirements.
Excellent, thank you. I believe this question is for Nancy. What are the most common roadblocks you see among customers trying to shift testing left?
I would say that it's organizational things. So a lot along the lines of what I spoke about in my presentation. So I think that it's trying to figure out who's the right person to take responsibility for testing, and ensuring that it's sort of baked into your organization. I think that tooling is very important. So if you're trying to shift left and you're using some legacy testing tools that require a ton of experience and a ton of training to use, that's going to also be really difficult to try to incorporate that kind of tooling into a current modern development cycle. So I'd say those are the biggest challenges. Dharminder, do you have anything you'd add to that in terms of what you're seeing for your customers?
I think absolutely, Nancy. One thing I agree with you definitely is that the organizational thing. And plus, what I've also seen historically is that because that's some shift I've been trying to push for the last 2 decades in different organizations. And what I see across is that a lot of time it's a pushback even from the manual QA managers. I have seen because they don't want to get involved. And of course, anytime we go into, there's a resistance to change. And then definitely the effort in framework test case restructuring, because if somebody is coming from a legacy model, from a traditional model, they have to put an effort. They have to ensure that they have to agree to put in that time. They have to ensure to put in that cost associated with making that change towards shifting left. And of course, learning new technologies and skill enhancements, because that definitely moves the engineers from being specialists towards generalists. Manual QA engineers need to be involved in test automation. I think all of these factors play a key role in getting that pushback and making sure we are successful.
Yeah, I'll just add that was a really good point you made in terms of needing to do a lot of retooling if you've been using legacy tools, because people put a ton of investment into that, right? And it's hard to give that up. So that was a really good point.
Excellent. Our next question is, how is the Agile model better than the V model?
Dharminder, do you want to?
Sure. I think probably it's the Agile model versus the waterfall model. That's what I'm understanding the question is, right, Andy? Okay. So,
yep.
So basically, what the way I feel the Agile model is better than the waterfall model, because some of the components, if you see in the Agile model, is we are talking about a sprint. If we talk about from the Agile model, it's a 2-week. And if you just compare that with in a waterfall model, in a 2-week period, there is no way in a waterfall model a development team would even get the QA engineer involved or look at the use cases from a customer scenario or do enough testing to make sure that when the product goes out after 2 weeks, that's technically a shippable, deployable product. That's one of the things I am seeing the industry shift right now, that the expectation is, well, after every 2 weeks there should be a deployable and shippable product, and there's no way it can be implemented in waterfall model. And plus, I also feel that in the agile model, there's an opportunity for engineers to enhance their skills, because currently what I saw in the traditional models as I was working with in different companies was there used to be manual test engineers, there used to be an automation engineer, there used to be an integration test engineer. And I was struggling for years to make sure to tell people that, well, the best way to do really is combine manual and automation engineers, enhance the skills. That's number one. Number two is definitely the testing of being involved as early in the SDLC as possible. In the traditional, let's say it's a 3-tier architecture, what I've really seen is that when the servers or when the frameworks were built, there was not much testing that was done till the actual app was built. Once the app was built, that's when the testing used to happen. What we did was that we used to push back and say, well, why do not we do a testing around servers as well as the frameworks? Because what we can do is we don't need to do functional testing, but at least we can do some stability testing. We can do some stress testing. And we used to see a lot of value in doing that. So that's where I feel that even in the traditional models, there have been bits and pieces where we were agile, but now with the full agile, it's more effective, more efficient, and much, much faster and shorter cycles.
Excellent. Well, that's all the time that we have for questions today. So on behalf of today's presenters, I'd like to thank everybody for attending today's webinar, and we hope to see you on another webinar soon. Thank you very much and have a nice day.